Okay, let me footnote here that I didn't know any of this 2 weeks ago. And we discovered that the springs that were installed in this engine didn't have enough seat pressure to run the 8,000 RPM that we want to run. It suggested that we have 400 pounds of seat pressure to run 8,000 RPM. Well, after some discussion, we decided we really don't need that much because these are relatively small valves and they're fairly lightweight, so we can get by with a little less seat pressure. And that's important because we don't want to exceed 800 pounds of force when they're open. So what we got to do is figure out how close we can get to that without going over. And the spring manufacturer gives us some information. They tell us how far you can compress this spring until the coils touch each other. And that's 1.100 inches. 1.100 inches. But they don't want you to do that. They would like you to stay with 80 thousandths clearance. So, if we add into that 80 thousandths clearance, we will end up with how much spring we can have here and how many shims we need to put in. But we need to know some information to do that. We need to know how much lift this spring will actually see. And the only way to really find that out is to measure it. So that's the first step. What we have to do is put a dial indicator on here and measure how far down that spring goes. Okay, in order to measure lift, it's done with 0 clearance. And obviously you can hear there's clearance in there. And we're going to do this intake valve. That's the one we're going to do. So what we want to do is rotate the engine over until this one is compressing the exhaust valve, and that way we know the intake is closed. So let's do that. There's the intake going down, and there goes the exhaust. So now what we want to do is take the clearance out here. I just unlocked the locker. And just so that there's no clearance. There we go, just like that. So just so there's no clearance there. Now we have to put a dial indicator on this. Now sometimes you're lucky. You got to get the shaft of the dial indicator exactly in line with the valve and perpendicular. And you got to leave a little clearance, so you want it bottom out. Alright, now the way I found to check this, the best way to check this is to take a straight edge and put it in line with the valve stems and look at the dial indicator. That's pretty darn close. And then we see if it's straight up and down. And that's pretty darn close. So, we set this to 0. Okay. Now we turn it over until it's fully depressed. And we go back. So now we know how much lift is in that cam through the push rod, through the rocker arm, which has a ratio to it, to the valve spring. It's not a calculated measure, it's what it actually is. And in this case, it's 728. 728. So we can plug that number in. 0.728. So now we have Bind, clearance, and lift. We add those up, and that'll give us this value right here. We have 1.1, 0.080, 0.728. So that gives you a value of 1.9080. So now we need to know what the current height is, what the distance is from here to here. So that's the next step. What we have to do is take the pressure off of these. Now this one has no pressure, so we can loosen that one right up and take it off. All right. And now we got to get this one off. So we just do the same thing. So they're both slack. Now we can take this rocker arm off without hurting anything. Put everything in a nice clean spot. Take these out so you can put them in the same way you took them out. Now we have valves exposed, but we don't want the valve to sink down in when we take the retainer off. We have to take the retainer off to measure the distance. So there's a couple ways to do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take some rubber hose and stuff the cylinder and bring the cylinder up. But what I got to do is get the cylinder down first. There's a couple ways to do that, but I'm going to do it this way. So if we look in the cylinder here, you can see the piston. Now we want the piston to go down and start its way back up. And now we're going to take some hose. And we're going to wipe it off because we don't want any dirt in the cylinder. And we just stuff the cylinder with it. Now some people use rope, but I'm told that's not a good thing to do because all the lint from the rope stays in the cylinder. And actually this works out pretty good because it's got enough stiffness to it that you can shove it in the cylinder. Where the rope, once it gets bound, it won't go in anymore. Okay, that's good. And what we'll do is bring the motor back up. Not pulling on it, but you know, enough to keep the valve. And now, these valves, even though they don't have enough pressure on it, have 280 pounds of force holding them. So a normal little Stott spring compressor doesn't work. There's this fancy dancy spring compressor that bolts onto the head. And I've taken some time to get this thing so that when this is all the way back here, it's in line with the valve. So we don't have to do that. And just a reminder, I didn't know any of this 2 weeks ago, so I may be doing something that's completely wrong, and if so, let me know. All right, now we're doing all this to find out what the height is. Okay, the spring is compressed into the container. Into the container. All right. All right, and we take the valve out, and we take the retainer off the valve, off the spring. Like so. That's the old spring. It won't be going back in. Now what we need to do is measure the height. So we put this little micrometer in. And the retainer. And the keepers, which are a pain in the neck. All right, so now we hold this up and we turn the micrometer so it takes all the slack out. And what you want to do is you don't want to screw the retainer up or the valve or put pressure on it, but what you want to do is wiggle it around until all the slack is gone. And we'll call it that. And it says it's 1.979. So if we take the height of 1.979, which is the distance we just measured right here, and we take that away from the 1.1 bind, the 80 thousandths clearance that we want, and a lift of 728 that we have here that we measured. If we take that away from this, we'll have the amount of shims that we want to put here and have this 80 thousandths. So if we take that away, we get 0.071. 0.071. So that's how many shims we want to put in there. Unfortunately, we have to do a compromise because shims come in 15, 30, and 60. So we can get 75, but that's too much. That'll take away from our clearance. We can get 60, that's pretty far down, but you'd rather have the clearance, I think. But what we could really do is, these shims are not all the same thicknesses. So if we go through the stack and find some thick ones, we ought to come up with pretty close to 0.071. And that's what we're gonna do. That's the next step. To verify that we're as close to 338 pounds of force with that amount of shims, what we can do is I have this tester right here. And what you do is put the spring in here and you dial up this 1.9080 and we should get a good pressure reading. So we're going to go downstairs and do that. So if we put a spring in there and put it in the vise, we'll get a reading and that'll tell us what we should have for a pressure. So let's go do that. Remember what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get as much sheet pressure as we can and still maintain this 80 thousandths clearance. And that's 80 thousandths clearance to when the spring would bind, the coils touch each other. We know we have a lift of 728 and that totals 1.908. We measured the total height from the retainer to the seat, and that was 1.979. If we take this combination away, that gives us the amount of shims that we want. So if we take this 1.908 and we put it in this little device right here and put it in the vise, and this is set to 1.908. And if we crank this down until it just touches, you'll see the needle jump. See how the needle jumps? So right there. Right there. So it's looking like it's 350 pounds of force, which is fine. That's good. So let's go put it in the engine. So in an ideal world, we would want 71 thousandths of shims, but the problem is shims only come in 15, 30, and 60,000 increments. So, and the shims, they vary a little bit. They're not all the same thickness. So I could go to 60, which would mean I'm 11 under. If I'm 11 under, I add to my clearance, which would mean I get 90,000. I could try to get to 71, and the closest I've got between these and going through them is, so 78 thousandths is too much. That means I'm going to be at a 70 thousandths clearance. So what I can do is try to get as close to 71 as I can. And I know that these 60 thousandths are thicker. So like there's one that's 64 thousandths. So that would mean I'd be adding to that. And acceptable is 110, 120. So I think this is the way we're going to go. We're going to go this way. We'll put 60 thousandths in there. So let's do that. So the first thing we got to do is take this height gauge out of there. And take the keepers out. And put them safely away. Take the micrometer out and retainer out. So we got this valve seal in the way. And I have found that these hose pliers work really well. You can get around the base of the seal and pull up on it, it comes off. Now the reason we got to get it off is so we can get the shims underneath it. So we can use the same pair of pliers to pick the base off, put the shim in, put the base back in. So now we got to put the valve seal back in. And the same pair of pliers that we used to take it out fits real nice around the top here without squeezing it, and just push down and you can actually feel it seat. So it's seated. Put the new spring in here right out of the gauge that we measured 340. Put that in there. Take the retainer, stick it on there. And the ratchet. Okay. And now the hardest part. And that's to get these keepers back in here. And my fingers are not small. Now we gotta take this off. Okay, we carefully set these rocker arms in here. That's what we'll do. Just put a little lube on the end. And that is the correct way, like that. With the numbers up. Numbers up. This motor's so new, it probably doesn't make any difference. Okay, a little dab here. A little dab there. A little dab there, a little dab there, and a little dab there. Turn these around. And there is a difference on the shaft here. There's an up and a down. Now, we have pressure on this thing, so all we're going to do is just start these screws so it's lined up. Okay, and we're going to turn this in the opposite direction so we can get the hose out. And there's quite a bit of hose there. All right. And now what we got to do is get these valves adjusted. So we're just going to turn this until. Okay, so no pressure, none, fully floating. Fully floating. Now we want to torque it. The torque on this is 25 dry and 28 everything else. At least that's what the book says. So this is set to 28. So we gotta go back to 25. 25. There's 25. There's 25. And there's 25, so now we're going to take 28. And that's right off of Crowler's website. That's 28. That's 28. And that's 28. So we'll go over it one more time. Once. Twice, 3 times. Okay. So now we still have slack. So now what we want to do is rotate until one's all the way down. Tape's gone down. So we can adjust the exhaust. Now, this is an aluminum block. Aluminum blocks grow quite a bit. You really set the valves when they're hot. The exhaust, when it's hot, wants to be 20 to 22, and the intake wants to be 18 to 20. Before I took these things apart, I measured what they were cold. Exhaust was a loose 8,000, and intake was a tight 8,000. Let me look at the cam card. 1 second. These are the cam card. And up here in the corner, it says intake is 18 to 20, exhaust is 20 to 22. So intake wants to be tight, exhaust wants to be loose. So exhaust wants to be loose, and that's a little tight. So we'll go right there. Not bad. Yep, I like it. Exhaust wants to be loose, intake wants to be tight. So now I'll bring intake. The exhaust is down, so intake is fully loose. And we need 3,000s. This wants to be tight. Yeah, I'd say that's tight. So the intake wanted to be tight, exhaust wanted to be loose. We're torqued down. These things are locked. Now we'll do one final thing. We have another tester here, and they never agree. So this one is loose. We just put this thing on here like this. So we had 340 downstairs. Let's see what we got here. So you can see where the needle taps when it hits the seat. So I'd say we got 340 here too. 330.5. 330.5. All right. So just to review, 1.1 is bind, 80 thousandths clearance. We had a lift of 0.728. That totaled 1.908. We measured the height from underneath the retainer to the base. That was 1.979. If we take this calculation, 1.908, we end up with 0.071 shims that we want. We want 71 thousandths in shims. It only comes 15, 30, and 60. So we opted for 60 rather than go above because we don't want to decrease our clearance. We found a shim that measured 63 thousandths. If we take 63 thousandths from 71 thousandths, it's 8 thousandths. So we added 8 thousandths to our clearance, so now our clearance is 0.088, which we can live with. We have a seat pressure of 335 pounds, which is livable. We were looking for 338, we got 335. One gauge measures 335, the other gauge measures 340. So I'd say we're pretty good. All right.